When we think of Cleopatra, what comes to mind? A seductive queen? A tragic love story with Mark Antony? Whispers of secret crimes in a royal bedroom? For centuries, this has been the popular image, painted by Roman propaganda and sensationalized by Hollywood. But today, we're going to peel back those layers of fiction and uncover a much more profound and devastating story. The real tragedy of Cleopatra isn't about love or lust. It's about the catastrophic loss of power, the sting of political humiliation, and the final, gasping breath of an ancient and magnificent civilization. Her suffering was immense, but it wasn't the kind you read about in romance novels. It was the complete and utter destruction of a queen's identity, her freedom, and everything she had ever known. To truly understand this, we need to go back and see who Cleopatra really was. She wasn't just a beautiful face. She was a brilliant mind. Cleopatra was the last active ruler of the Ptolemaic kingdom of Egypt. She was a direct descendant of Ptolemy, the first, one of Alexander the Great's most trusted generals. Unlike many of her predecessors, she embraced her Egyptian subjects. She was the first Ptolemaic ruler in 300 years to learn the Egyptian language. She participated in their religious ceremonies and presented herself as the reincarnation of the goddess Isis. This wasn't just clever politics. It was a genuine connection to the land and its people. She was a scholar, a linguist who reportedly spoke 9 languages, and a shrewd political strategist. She inherited a kingdom that was on the brink of collapse, squeezed between the declining power of the Hellenistic world and the rising might of Rome. Her entire reign was a high-stakes balancing act, a desperate fight to maintain Egypt's independence. Her relationships with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony were not merely affairs of the heart. They were calculated political alliances. With Caesar, she secured her throne against her rival siblings and gained a powerful Roman ally. Their son, Caesarion, represented a potential future where Egypt and Rome could be united, not through conquest, but through a shared dynasty. This was Cleopatra, its grand vision, a powerful Eastern empire, with Alexandria as its capital, that could stand as an equal to Rome. After Caesar's assassination, this dream seemed to crumble. But Cleopatra was a survivor. She then found a new partner in Mark Antony, another of Rome's most powerful men. Together, they renewed the vision. They ruled the eastern territories of the Roman Republic from Alexandria, a city that rivaled Rome in its wealth, culture, and intellectual brilliance. Their partnership was one of shared ambition. At the famous donations of Alexandria, they presented their children as rulers of newly created eastern kingdoms. This was a direct challenge to the authority of Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and Antony's rival in Rome. Cleopatra wasn't just a consort, she was a co-ruler, a queen in her own right, commanding fleets and influencing policy. She was on the verge of creating a new world order, but this ambition made her a terrifying figure in Rome. Octavian, a master of propaganda, launched a vicious smear campaign against her. He painted her not as a capable ruler, but as a decadent, foreign sorceress who had bewitched a noble Roman Antony with her exotic charms. He declared war, not on Antony but on Cleopatra. This was a genius move. It turned a Roman civil war into a patriotic defense of Roman values against a corrupting foreign queen. The final confrontation came at the naval battle of Actium in 31 BC. The defeat of Antony and Cleopatra's combined forces was catastrophic. It marked the end of their dream. They fled back to Egypt, but the end was inevitable. Octavian's legions followed, and the once mighty kingdom of Egypt was cornered. It's in these final days that we find the true essence of her tragedy. Imagine the weight of that reality. For over 20 years, she had fought tooth and nail to preserve her kingdom's sovereignty. She had outmaneuvered rivals, forged powerful alliances, and dared to dream of an empire that could rival Rome itself. Now, all of it was gone. Mark Antony, upon hearing a false report of Cleopatra's death, took his own life. He died in her arms, leaving her utterly alone to face their conqueror. This is where the story often focuses on the heartbroken lover. But Cleopatra was still a queen, and her thoughts were on the future, a future that was rapidly closing in. Octavian entered Alexandria as a conqueror. He captured Cleopatra, and, according to ancient sources, met with her. This meeting wasn't a romantic negotiation. It was the ultimate humiliation. The brilliant queen, descendant of gods and kings, was now a prisoner of her most bitter enemy. Octavian's goal was clear. He wanted to parade her through the streets of Rome in his triumpha, public spectacle, where she would be displayed in chains as the ultimate symbol of his victory. This is the core of her suffering. It wasn't physical torture, but a profound psychological one. For a ruler who embodied divine authority and national pride, the thought of being paraded as a spoil of war was a fate worse than death. It would be the final, crossing blow, not just to her, but to the dignity of Egypt itself. The Romans had already begun dismantling her legacy, destroying her statues and erasing her name. The triumph would cement this erasure. She would be remembered not as the powerful pharaoh she was, but as a defeated foreign mistress. She would become a footnote in Octavian's story. Her final act was not one of despair, but of defiance. She understood that she had one last move to make, one final way to control her own narrative. By taking her own life, she robbed Octavian of his ultimate prize. She denied him the satisfaction of publicly shaming her. She chose the manner of her death, ensuring it was one befitting an Egyptian queen, a death that legends say was delivered by an aspi, a symbol of divine royalty in Egypt. This final act was her last assertion of power. She couldn't save her kingdom. She could unsave her children. Octavian would later have her son Caesarion executed, but she could save her honor and her identity as a queen. She chose to die a pharaoh in her own land, rather than live as a prisoner in Rome. The real tragedy of Cleopatra is the story of a brilliant and capable ruler whose kingdom was swallowed by a larger, more ruthless empire. It's the story of a clash of civilizations, where the rich, ancient culture of Egypt was extinguished by the relentless expansion of Rome. Her death wasn't just a personal loss, it was the end of an era. With her, the line of pharaohs ended after 3 millennia. Egypt became a Roman province, its vast wealth funneled to Rome, its people now subjects of a distant emperor. The vibrant, multicultural world of Hellenistic Alexandria slowly faded, its great libraries' influence waning as the center of power shifted decisively to the west. Cleopatra's story is a stark reminder of how history is written by the victors. Octavian, soon to be Emperor Augustus, successfully crafted the narrative that has endured for centuries. The story of a dangerous seductress. But the truth is far more complex and far more tragic. It's the story of the last queen of Egypt who fought with everything she had to protect her people and her legacy, and in the end chose to define her own death. When you hear the name Cleopatra, what comes to mind? A legendary beauty, perhaps. The last queen of Egypt, while she was both, Cleopatra VII was so much more. She was a brilliant ruler, a cunning politician, and a formidable intellect who fought desperately to save her kingdom from the jaws of the most powerful empire the world had ever seen. Rome. Forget the myths for a moment, and let's dive into the story of the real Cleopatra. Born in 69 BC into the Ptolemaic dynasty, Cleopatra was not ethnically Egyptian but of Greek descent. From a young age, she was immersed in a world of power, politics, and knowledge. The royal court in Alexandria was a hub of learning, home to the greatest library in the ancient world. Cleopatra thrived in this environment. She was fiercely intelligent and received a top-tier education, studying everything from mathematics and astronomy to philosophy and rhetoric. But what truly set her apart was her incredible gift for languages. Ancient sources say she was the first Ptolemaic ruler to actually learn the Egyptian language. This was a genius political move, allowing her to connect directly with her people in a way none of her predecessors could. But she didn't stop there. She reportedly spoke at least 9 languages, including Greek, Ethiopian, Hebrew, and Arabic. This linguistic skill wasn't just for show. It was a powerful tool in diplomacy, allowing her to negotiate with foreign leaders and ambassadors without needing an interpreter. Imagine the advantage that gave her, building personal rapport and ensuring her words were never lost in translation. When Cleopatra ascended to the throne, Egypt was in a precarious position. The kingdom was rich in resources, especially grain, which made it the breadbasket of the Mediterranean. This wealth made it a tempting prize for the rapidly expanding Roman Republic. Internally, she faced power struggles with her own siblings, who were co-rulers and rivals. Cleopatra knew she couldn't fight Rome's military might head-on. She had to use her mind. Her strategy was to forge alliances with Rome's most powerful men, This is where Julius Caesar enters the story. When a civil war in Rome spilled over into Egypt, Cleopatra saw her chance. In an now famous tale of audacity, she had herself smuggled past her brother as guards and delivered to Caesar rolled up in a carpet. Caesar, one of the most brilliant military and political minds in history, was instantly captivated not just by her charm, but by her sharp intellect and bold spirit. They became allies and lovers. With Caesar's military backing, Cleopatra secured her throne. More importantly, she secured a powerful Roman protector for Egypt. Their alliance gave her a son, Caesarion, whom she hoped would one day rule a combined Egyptian-Roman empire. After Caesar's assassination, the Roman world was thrown into chaos again. A new power player emerged. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal general. Cleopatra needed a new Roman ally, and Antony needed Egypt's vast wealth to fund his armies. They met, and once again, Cleopatra used her charisma and intelligence to forge a powerful bond. Their relationship was not just a political alliance, it was a deep and passionate love affair that produced 3 children. For years, they ruled the eastern Mediterranean together from Alexandria, creating a powerful counterweight to Rome. They envisioned a new world order, with their children ruling over vast territories. But their ambition put them on a direct collision course with Caesar's adopted son, Octavian. In Rome, Octavian launched a vicious propaganda campaign against them, painting Cleopatra as a dangerous foreign seductress who had corrupted a noble Roman general. He declared war not on Antony, but on Cleopatra herself. The final showdown came at the naval battle of Actium in 31 BC. The forces of Antony and Cleopatra were defeated. As Octavian's army closed in on Alexandria, Antony took his own life, mistakenly believing Cleopatra was already dead. Faced with the humiliation of being paraded through the streets of Rome as a captive, Cleopatra made her final, defiant choice. According to legend, she committed suicide by allowing an ASP to bite her. She was 39 years old. With her death, the Ptolemaic dynasty ended, and Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire. Cleopatra's story is often reduced to her relationships with 2 famous Romans, but she was so much more than a seductress. She was a multilingual scholar, a shrewd diplomat, and a queen who used every tool at her disposal: her intellect, her charm, her wealth, and her courage to protect her country and her people for over 2 decades. She was a master of political theater, a devoted mother, and the last. Ever wonder how a single resource could make or break the most powerful empire in the ancient world? It wasn't gold, it wasn't iron, it was something far more fundamental: grain. And at the heart of this story is Rome, a city-state growing into a colossal empire, and its insatiable hunger. Picture this: Rome in the late Republic. The city is exploding. People from all over Italy and beyond are flocking to the capital, seeking fortune or just a new life. The population swells from a few 100,000 to over 1 million people. That's 1 million mouths to feed every single day. The farms surrounding Rome, the fields of Italy, they just couldn't keep up. This wasn't just a logistical problem, it was a political time bomb. A hungry population is an angry population, and angry mobs can topple governments. The leaders of Rome knew this. Their power, their careers, their very lives depended on keeping the citizens fed and content. So, where did they turn? They looked across the Mediterranean to a land that had been the breadbasket of the ancient world for millennia. Egypt. For thousands of years, the predictable, life-giving flood of the Nile River had deposited rich, fertile silt along its banks, creating an agricultural paradise. While other lands were at the mercy of unpredictable rainfall, Egypt's harvest was almost guaranteed. Year after year, its fields produced staggering surpluses of wheat and barley. It was a land of unimaginable wealth, not just in gold, but in the golden fields of grain that stretched as far as the eye could see. To a Roman general or politician, Egypt wasn't just another territory to conquer. It was the ultimate prize. Controlling Egypt meant controlling the food supply. It meant you could feed the legions. You could feed the masses in Rome. You could quell riots before they even started. It meant you held the key to stability and immense popularity. Whoever controlled Egypt's grain controlled Rome. This single fact would come to dominate the ambitions and fears of Rome's most powerful men. This is where our story takes a dramatic turn. and a legendary figure steps onto the stage, Cleopatra VII. When we think of Cleopatra, we often think of romance, glamour, and tragedy. But first and foremost, she was a shrewd and intelligent ruler, fighting desperately to keep her kingdom independent. She inherited the throne of a nation that was fabulously wealthy but also incredibly vulnerable. She knew, better than anyone, that the source of her kingdom's power, its grain, was also what made it a target. Cleopatra understood the Roman mindset perfectly. She saw the civil wars tearing the Republic apart, the insatiable ambition of its generals. She knew she couldn't defeat Rome on the battlefield. The Roman legions were an unstoppable force. So, she chose a different weapon: diplomacy and alliance. Her strategy was to bind herself and her kingdom to the most powerful man in Rome at any given moment. If she could make herself indispensable to Rome's leader, she could ensure Egypt's survival. Her first and most famous alliance was with Julius Caesar. When Caesar arrived in Egypt, he wasn't just chasing his rival, Pompey the Great. He was also a man in desperate need of money and resources to continue his political and military campaigns. Cleopatra saw her chance. Famously, she had herself smuggled to him, rolled up in a carpet, to gain a private audience. But this was more than just a dramatic entrance. It was a calculated political move. She presented herself not as a conquered queen, but as a potential partner. She offered Caesar what he needed most: access to Egypt's vast wealth. With her financial backing, Caesar could pay his legions and solidify his power in Rome. In return, Caesar's military might secure her throne against her rivals, including her own brother. It was a brilliant symbiosis. She wasn't his puppet. She was his financier and a key strategic ally. Through Caesar, Cleopatra ensured that Egypt remained, for a time, independent and under her control. But the ancient world was a volatile place. The daggers that struck down Caesar on the Ides of March in 44 BC did unjust kill a man. They shattered Cleopatra's entire political strategy. Her protector was gone. Rome was plunged into another brutal civil war, a power vacuum that new ambitious men rushed to fill. Once again, Cleopatra and Egypt were in a precarious position. She had to navigate this new landscape, find a new protector, and re-establish her alliance. The Roman world was now split between two main figures: Caesar's heir, the cool and calculating Octavian, who controlled the West, and Caesar's charismatic and battle-hardened general, Mark Antony, who controlled the East. For Cleopatra, the choice was obvious. Geographically and politically, her fate was tied to the master of the East. She needed an alliance with Mark Antony. Their first meeting at Tarsus is the stuff of legend. Antony summoned her to explain her actions during the recent civil war, but Cleopatra didn't arrive as a subordinate begging for forgiveness. She staged one of the greatest public relations spectacles in history. She sailed up the Kidnus River in a magnificent golden barge with purple sails, rowed by silver oars. She herself was dressed as the goddess Venus, surrounded by attendants. It was a breathtaking display of wealth, power, and confidence. She wasn't just meeting a general. She was a goddess, meeting a god, presenting herself as Antony's equal. And it worked. Antony was captivated, not just by her charm, but by the strategic advantage she offered. Like Caesar before him, Antony needed Egypt's resources. He had grand ambitions of his own, dreaming of campaigns in the east against Parthia. These campaigns would require a massive amount of funding and, crucially, a reliable supply of grain to feed his armies. Cleopatra could provide both. Their political alliance quickly blossomed into a famous love affair, but at its core, it was a strategic partnership. Antony got the financial and logistical support he needed to be a major player in Rome, and Cleopatra got a Roman protector who would guarantee her throne and Egypt's autonomy. For several years, this partnership held. They ruled the eastern Mediterranean from Alexandria, a glittering and powerful couple. Back in Rome, however, Octavian was watching all of this with growing alarm. He was a master of propaganda, and he began to paint a sinister picture for the Roman people. He portrayed Antony not as a Roman general in a strategic alliance, but as a man who had forgotten his Roman identity, bewitched by a foreign queen. He accused Antony of going native, of abandoning Roman values for the decadent luxuries of the East. The narrative he spun was powerful. Antony planned to move the capital of the Roman Empire from Rome to Alexandria. He was giving away Roman territories to Cleopatra and her children. The ultimate fear he stoked was that Antony, under Cleopatra's influence, would make her the Queen of Rome. This propaganda was incredibly effective. It turned Roman public opinion firmly against Antony and Cleopatra. The grain supply was central to this too. Octavian presented himself as the defender of Rome, the one who would secure the vital grain shipments that Antony and his foreign queen now controlled. The conflict was no longer just a power struggle between two men. It was framed as a clash of civilizations. The virtuous, traditional West against the decadent, corrupt. East Octavian declared war, not on Antony, a fellow Roman, which would have been politically difficult, but on Cleopatra. This clever move painted Antony as a traitor, fighting on the side of Rome's enemy. The final confrontation came in 31 BC, at the naval battle of Actium. It was a disaster for Antony and Cleopatra. Their fleet was outmaneuvered and destroyed by Octavian's admiral, Agrippa. They managed to escape and flee back to Egypt, but their cause was lost. Their armies deserted them, and their power evaporated. Octavian pursued them relentlessly. He wasn't just defeating a rival anymore. He was coming to claim the ultimate prize. As Octavian's legions closed in on Alexandria, Antony, hearing a false report of Cleopatra's death, took his own life. Cleopatra, now truly alone, was captured by Octavian. He intended to parade her through the streets of Rome in his triumphal procession, the ultimate symbol of his victory and her humiliation. But Cleopatra would not grant him that satisfaction. In a final act of defiance, she took her own life, famously by the bite of an asp. She chose to die a queen rather than live as a Roman captive. With her death, the Ptolemaic dynasty, which had ruled Egypt for 300 years, came to an end. And just as Cleopatra had feared, Egypt's independence died with her. Octavian, soon to be known as Augustus, the first Roman emperor, did not make Egypt a regular province governed by the Senate. It was far too important for that. He annexed it as his own personal property. He, and the emperors who followed him, controlled Egypt's grain supply directly. This wasn't just a symbol of power. It was the very foundation of it. The annual grain fleet from Alexandria to Rome, the Annona, became the lifeline of the empire. It ensured the emperor could feed the people, keep the peace, and maintain his absolute authority. The story of Cleopatra and Rome is more than just a tale of love and war. It's a stark lesson in geopolitics and the power of resources. Cleopatra's entire reign was a brilliant, desperate balancing act to use her kingdom's greatest assets to keep the wolves of Rome at bay. For a time, she succeeded spectacularly, but in the end, Rome's hunger was simply too great. The empire needed Egypt's grain to survive, and it would stop at nothing to control it. The fall of Cleopatra marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new one, where the fate of the world's greatest empire would be decided not just by swords. Have you ever heard of a love story so powerful it threatened to tear the Roman Republic apart? Well, get ready, because today we're diving into the legendary alliance of Cleopatra and Mark Antony. This wasn't just a romance. It was a political masterstroke that could have changed the course of history forever. After Julius Caesar's assassination, Rome was in chaos. Power was up for grabs, and one of the most formidable players was Mark Antony. He was a brilliant general, charismatic, and a close friend of Caesar. He controlled the eastern half of the Roman territories, which brought him face to face with the most powerful woman in the Mediterranean, Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt. When Antony summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus to question her loyalty, he probably expected a subordinate ruler. He got something else entirely. Cleopatra didn't just show up, she made an entrant. She sailed up the Kidnus River in a magnificent golden barge, dressed as the goddess Venus, surrounded by attendants. Antony was instantly captivated. This wasn't just a political meeting anymore. It was the beginning of an epic partnership. Their connection was immediate and intense. They spent the winter of 41 to 40 BC together in Alexandria, the vibrant capital of Egypt. It was a time of legendary feasting, lavish parties, and intellectual debates. They even formed their own society called the Inimitable Livers, dedicated to a life of pleasure and luxury. But beneath all the extravagance, A powerful political alliance was being forged. Cleopatra needed Roman military might to secure her throne and Egypt's independence. Antony needed Egypt's immense wealth, its grain, its gold to pay his legions and fund his ambitions. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with. They had a shared vision to create a new, powerful Eastern empire, with Alexandria as its capital. Rivaling Rome itself, Antony began to adopt Eastern customs, which was scandalous to the traditional Romans. He and Cleopatra had 3 children together, further solidifying their personal and political bond. In a grand public ceremony known as the Donations of Alexandria, Antony declared Cleopatra Queen of Kings and their children the rulers of vast eastern territories, Tamani and Rome. This was an outrageous betrayal. Meanwhile, back in Rome, another key figure was watching all of this with growing alarm. Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and heir. Octavian was cold, calculating, and incredibly ambitious. He and Antony were supposed to be sharing power, but their rivalry was deep and bitter. Octavian saw Antony's relationship with Cleopatra as a golden opportunity for propaganda. He painted Antony as a man who had abandoned his Roman virtues, bewitched by a foreign queen, and ready to hand over the republic to an Egyptian dynasty. He portrayed Cleopatra not as a capable ruler, but as a dangerous seductress who threatened everything Rome stood for. The tension escalated until it could no longer be contained. Octavian skillfully turned Roman public opinion against the pair. He even read Antony's will aloud in the Senate, which confirmed his desire to be buried in Alexandria with Cleopatra. This was the final straw. It was seen as the ultimate rejection of his Roman heritage. The stage was set for a final, decisive conflict. It wasn't just a civil war between 2 Roman generals anymore. It was Rome versus Egypt, West versus East, Octavian versus the combined might of Antony and Cleopatra. The fate of the ancient world hung in the balance, and it would all come down to one epic. Imagine the salty spray of the Ionian Sea, the thunder of thousands of oars striking the water in unison, and the fate of an empire hanging in the balance. This isn't a movie scene. This was the reality on September 2nd, 31 BCE, at the legendary Battle of Actium. This wasn't just a battle. It was the final, explosive chapter in the long and bloody civil wars that had torn the Roman Republic apart for decades. On one side, we have Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, a young, cunning, and ambitious politician. On the other, the formidable duo, Mark Antony, the celebrated general, and his lover, Queen Cleopatra of Egypt, the most powerful woman in the world. The stakes couldn't have been higher. This was a clash of titans, a collision of East and West, a fight for the very soul of Rome. Antony and Cleopatra commanded a massive fleet, a spectacle of power and wealth, with enormous, heavily armed warships. Their strategy was brute force. Octavian, advised by his brilliant general Marcus Agrippa, countered with a different approach. His fleet was smaller, composed of lighter, more agile vessels called Libra. It was a classic contest of strength versus speed, a heavyweight boxer against a nimble martial artist. As the sun climbed high over the Greek coast, the 2 fleets met. Antony's larger ships, like floating fortresses, were difficult to breach, but Agrippa's smaller ships were faster and more maneuverable. They swarmed around Antony's behemoths, darting in to strike, and then retreating before a counterattack could be mounted. They used a weapon called the harpax, a catapult-fired grappling hook, to latch onto the enemy's ships, reeling them in for boarding. It was chaotic, brutal, and incredibly effective. The battle raged 4 hours under the hot Mediterranean sun, with the clash of steel and the cries of men echoing across the water. Then, the tide of battle turned dramatically. In a move that historians still debate to this day, Cleopatra, with her squadron of 60 Egyptian ships, suddenly broke through the lines and sailed away from the fight. Why? Was it a prearranged escape plan? Did she panic? Or was she trying to lure Antony away from a losing battle? We may never know for sure. But what happened next sealed their fate. Mark Antony, seeing his lover's flagship sailing away, abandoned his men, abandoned his command, and followed her. He boarded a smaller, faster ship and chased after Cleopatra, leaving his massive army and navy to fend for themselves. The effect on his forces was devastating. Imagine being a soldier or a sailor, fighting for your life, and suddenly seeing your commander desert the battlefield. Morale shattered instantly. The fight went out of them. Leaderless and confused, what remained of Antony's fleet was either captured or destroyed by Octavian's relentless forces. One by one, his legions, stationed on the nearby shore, witnessed the defeat and began to surrender. The great military power that Antony had commanded for years simply melted away. Antony and Cleopatra managed to escape, fleeing back to Alexandria in Egypt. But their world was collapsing. News of the disaster at Actium spread like wildfire. Their allies deserted them, their supporters vanished, and the armies they still commanded began to switch their allegiance to the victor Octavian. The couple who had once dreamed of ruling a vast Eastern empire were now trapped, isolated, and running out of time. Hope was a luxury they could no longer afford. Octavian, now the undisputed master of the Roman world, pursued them to Egypt. The final act of this tragedy was about to play out. Faced with certain defeat, both Antony and Cleopatra chose to end their own lives, rather than be paraded through the streets of Rome as captives in Octavian's triumphal procession. Their dramatic end marked the end of an era. The Roman Republic was officially dead, and from its ashes, the Roman Empire would rise, with Octavian, now known as Augustus, as its first emperor. The Battle of Actium wasn't just a naval victory. It was the birth certificate. Have you ever wondered what happens when a queen loses everything? I'm not just talking about a crown or a kingdom, but her lover, her army, and her freedom, all in a matter of days. This is the tragic, final chapter of Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt. Imagine the scene. Alexandria, the jewel of the ancient world, is in chaos. The formidable Roman legions, led by the cold and calculating Octavian, are at the city gates. Inside the palace, a drama of Shakespearean proportions is unfolding. Mark Antony, the great Roman general and Cleopatra's passionate lover, receives false news that his queen is dead. Consumed by grief and a sense of betrayal, he falls on his own sword, choosing death over a life without her. When Cleopatra hears of Antony's final, desperate act, her world shatters. She rushes to his side, holding him in his dying moments. Picture the anguish of that moment. The man she loved, the father of her children, the powerful ally who stood by her side against Rome, now gone forever, and his death was triggered by a lie. A tragic misunderstanding. With Antony dead, Cleopatra is utterly alone. Her powerful Roman protector is gone. The Egyptian army, demoralized and outmatched, is no match for Octavian's disciplined forces. The Roman army storms Alexandria, and the city that was once her playground and her fortress now becomes her prison. The Queen of Egypt, a woman who charmed Julius Caesar and captivated Mark Antony, a ruler who commanded navies and held the fate of nations in her hands, is now a captive. Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, has her exactly where he wants her. He sees her not as a fellow ruler, but as the ultimate prize. His plan is to parade her through the streets of Rome in his triumph, a living trophy to symbolize his absolute victory in the conquest of Egypt. For Cleopatra, this is a fate worse than death. She, a descendant of the great Ptolemaic dynasty, a goddess in the eyes of her people, being humiliated and dragged in chains for the entertainment of Roman mobs. Untincable. She has lost her lover, her kingdom, and her freedom, but she has one thing left. Her pride, locked away in her palace, under the watchful eyes of Roman guards, Cleopatra begins to plot her final move. She's not planning an escape. She knows that's impossible. She is planning her exit on her own terms. She manages to get a message to Octavian, a plea to be buried next to Antony. This was part of her plan, a way to make him think she might be compliant. Then she prepares for her death. She dresses in her finest royal robes, looking every bit the queen she was. The traditional story, the one we all know, is that she had a basket of figs brought to her, with a deadly aspi hidden inside. Whether it was an aspi, another type of venomous snake, or even Aphis acting poisson, the result was the same. She chose a death that was symbolic. The snake was a symbol of divine royalty in ancient Egypt, an emblem of the goddess Isis, whom Cleopatra identified with. By choosing this method, she wasn't just ending her life. She was performing her final act as a pharaoh, an immortal goddess joining her ancestors. She lay down on her golden couch, flanked by her two loyal handmaidens, Iris and Charmian, who chose to die with their queen. When Octavian's guards burst into the room, it was too late. They found Cleopatra lifeless, still looking majestic in her final sleep. Charmian, with her last breath, was adjusting the diadem on her queen's head. One of the guards angrily asked, "Was this a worthy deed, Charmian?" And she replied, "It was worthy indeed, and fitting for a queen descended from so many kings." Octavian was furious. He had been denied his ultimate prize. He couldn't parade Cleopatra through Rome, but he did fulfill her last wish. He buried her with full honors, right beside her beloved Mark Antony. Their love story, filled with passion, power, and politics, ended with them united in death. With Cleopatra's passing, the age of the pharaohs came to a definitive end after 3,000 years. Egypt became a province of Rome, and its vast wealth flowed into Roman, helping to solidify Octavian's power as he transformed the Roman Republic into the Roman Empire. So, the story of Cleopatra is not just about a beautiful seductress. It's the story of a brilliant, powerful, and defiant ruler who fought to protect her kingdom and her legacy against the might of Rome, and who, in the end, chose to control her own destiny. Thanks for watching. If you're fascinated by the dramatic lives of historical figures, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. See you next time.